All right, welcome back, artists. This is a tutorial on 145 changes. This is specific to harmony, so if you've already created some bass lines with 145 and the rhythm tracks, and you need a little help with putting together chords, this is the right video for you. So what we're going to do first is we're going to load up a project that already has a 145 formatted progression going on. We're going to look at how we can create harmony with those 145 bass lines. We're going to learn how we can take chords and construct them using 135, what is known as a triad. And then we're going to take that triad and we're going to invert them by moving some of the octaves around a little bit. We'll show you some different options of how you can make different voicings for these chords. Lastly, we're going to check out some chopping tools about how you can access and accent different notes of that harmony. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can take velocity and you can play around with velocity controls as well. All right, that said, let's get into it. I'm loading a project that we used previously, so this project should seem somewhat familiar if you checked out the 145 2 video, or 145 Changes 2, which is the second version of this series here, where we just talked about 145 putting together sections that have two different sections, or a playlist that has two different sections, that has a drum track that changes. So here I have a drum track that plays normally with a hi-hat, and then I have a Latin track over here that plays with a ride. So the cymbal changes, gives a little bit of a feeling, a little different feeling. And then what we have down here is we have our bass line. So I have a 145 based bass line here, and then a 145 bass line here as well. Let's hear how it sounds so far, just so we can get an idea of what it sounds like. So I had one note that was off there. There was a C that turned into a B. I must have accidentally slid it down or something. So I moved that back. Now all of the notes are 1, 4, and 5 in here. So we can take a look here and we can see everything sounds pretty consonant with each other. There's not really a whole lot of tension going on. In the B section, you can hear that when it goes up to the 5, there's that tension that wants to be resolved. It starts by going down to the 4, but then it comes back up, and it eventually returns home. When it goes back to the 1, we generally refer to that as musicians as going back to the key or the tonic or home. Really, that's where the song wants to rest. And as musicians, once you pick a key or you pick a root, it's all about playing around with the tension that leads you back home, and you actually get the choice whether you want to end up going home or not. So really, it's all about the choices of what you want to sound in consonance with each other or in dissonance. Let's talk about how we can actually use this line right here, this bass line, to create some chords. So I'm going to go and take this bass line. If I double click on it in the arrangement window, you're going to pop it up, and you'll see that it selects the pattern that you are using, which is bass 1 in this case. And I've got all these notes down here. This is my bass 1 section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all this by pressing Control A and then Control C to copy it. So I've copied these notes over. I'm going to create a new pattern up here. So I'm going to go up here, and instead of bass 1, I'm going to call this keys 1. So I'm going to add in some keys in here. To do this, I'm going to go and just open up a new instrument here. So I'm going to go into my channel rack, that is all the instruments that I have here. I'm going to go down to my keys, and I'll open up the piano roll in my keys. And I'm going to press Control V to paste those notes that I had from my bass line. So now all the notes that were on my bass line here, the 1 and 4 that you see here, have been pasted into my keyboard here in my keys section of my pattern called keys. Now you'll notice that it's not going to play back in my section A here. It's actually down here in my keys pattern over here on the left side where my pattern picker is on my arrangement window. So I can click on that to be able to paint with it, and I'm just going to draw a couple of them here. So I'm just going to work on section A. If you hold down Control and you click on the section you want to play with, then you'll select just that one area, and we can hear how this sounds. So I can hear that my keys are playing the same exact notes that my bass is. Let me show you how we can go in and we can actually add to this in a way that is harmonically comfortable and consonant. So we talked a little bit before about how 1, 4, and 5 works over here on the keyboard piano. I'm going to revisit that. We have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8, but it's also a 1. We just usually count 8 as 1. We just consider this to be the same note an octave away. So if we only count up to 7 here for this initial lesson here, this initial idea, what we're going to do is we're going to add, for every bass note that we have, we're going to do what is called harmony in thirds. So what that means is every third note, you're going to put down a note. So I have this as 1, 2, 3. So that means I want to put down a note right here where this is. So I'm going to put a note right there. And I can see that basically I'm skipping a white note every time I want to put down a chord note. So I skip this one and I put down this one. Then I'm going to skip this one and put down this one. So this is known as basically 1, 3, 5 chord, and it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around because it's all based around what your root note is. So if I start on this note, then I'm picking 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put down a note there, and then I'm going to go 1, 4, and 5, and I put down that note. Now, if I go down to this next one over here, I do the same thing. So this is my 1, 2, 3. I want to play this note right here, and you'll notice that on the grid itself right here, you can see that the white notes have this kind of lighter color on the grid, and the black notes here have this kind of darker color on the grid here. So if you weren't right next to the piano right here, you can still somewhat see where the white notes are on the grid here, and you can place those notes down. So I'm starting from here, 1, 2, 3. I'm putting that note down, which is right here. And then I'm going to go 4 and 5 and put this note down. All right, so I've got those notes as well. Let's go to the next section and see what we can do. I'm just going to scroll forward a little bit. There we go. So if I go back to my C note here, same idea as before. I'm going to start off by having my first note here, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to put down that note, 3, 4, 5, and I'll put down this note. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing for my F note over here. I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, and put down this note, 4, and 5, and I'll put that note down. All right, if I play these notes now in my pattern, it should sound pretty consonant. All right, I like that. However, there's other ways that we can order these notes. Oftentimes, you'll have no single instrument playing on top of another instrument's note. You often want to separate the sounds out so that way every instrument has its own frequency range. And if there's a note that one instrument is playing, you want to try to get other instruments not to play that note. That way, every instrument has its own little place that it lives in, and it is responsible for bringing that together. So that said, I'm going to take these notes, these bass notes down here on the bottom, and I'm going to move them up 1 octave. So a way to do that is you can hold down Control, and you can click on a note. Like I'm going to select the bottom note right here on C4 here. When I hold down Control and I click on it, you'll see it turn red. Now, I could manually drag this up exactly 1 octave, which means that I'm dragging it from C4 down here up to C5. I could do that. Or you could alternatively, if I wanted to do the same action on this F note right here, I'm going to hold down Control and click on it. You can press Control down and press up or down to move that note down an octave. Move it up or down an octave. I'm going to move all of these root notes up 1 octave just to hear how it sounds when I do that. It's the same note being played, but now the root note is being played by the bass only. So that's what you're hearing down here on the bottom. The bass is going to fill in that bottom note, and now these chords are going to play up on top. Let's hear how this sounds. right, pretty cool, except maybe I want to introduce just a little bit of variety to this. So instead of having these two second chords here exactly the same as what's here, I'm going to vary them up a little bit. I'm just going to choose this middle note here, and move this up an octave. And then I'm going to choose this, this bottom note down here and move that up an octave. I'm just kind of choosing arbitrarily at this point just to hear what sounds. But something that you're going to know, that you're going to note, is that the top note of any chords that you play, you're going to hear that more prominently than any of the other notes. The top note of the chord is what your ear picks up the most. So in this case, I can see that my notes are going to be ascending. It's going to start low, and then it's going to move up higher and higher in my chords. So when I hear it, it's going to sound like it's ascending. Very interesting. So I have a lot of variety of what I can do at this point. I can select single notes and move them up and down octaves to get whatever kind of sound I want. Really, it's up to you as an artist to pick which frequencies you feel like using. But something to know is just all these notes are just 1, 3, and 5 of each one of the chords that I put in here. Basically, you're counting 1, 2, 3, and you're skipping a note in between each one. Let's do the same thing, but for our other pattern. So I'm going to go back over to my arrangement window. I'm going to go to section B. I'm going to click on bass 2 here, and I'm going to select all this stuff and copy it. I'm going to go back into my arrangement window, and I'm going to create a new section here. This is going to be called Keys 2. I'm going to put Keys 2 down here, so that way you can see it. And I'm going to double click on that, go into my keys here, and use the piano roll. And now we can see that I have FL keys in this new pattern here. I'm just going to paste what I just created. I'll move that over here to the beginning. There we go. So this is basically my bass line that I took from bass 2 here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw chords just the same way I did before. So over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to take a look at these notes. This is my 1. So I'm going to go skip 1 white key, play this one. Go up 1 white key, skip it, go to this one. So same idea, I have my 1, skip 1, 3, skip 1, and 5. There we go. Let's go to the next one here. If I move over a little bit, we can see where this is going to go. If I don't want to move over to the keyboard, we can see the white keys right here, and we can see the black keys. So I'm just going to skip 1 white key and put the information for the next one. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There we go. Let me go to the next one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we'll notice that this has a little bit of a different in timing here, so I'm just going to shorten these notes to make it match. Go back over here. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to go to this last note here, and we'll put this in. So it starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to take both of these notes and just extend them out a little bit. You can extend notes. You can hold down Control, and you can click and drag to select multiple notes. And if you wanted to extend their timing, there's this little thing which can allow you to take an entire section of notes and stretch them out. Or if you wanted to just change the duration, you can just move this over. There we go. All right, so now all my chords are in place. Let's hear how it sounds. Now, something that can be helpful when you're composing, if you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and you right-click while you're in the piano roll, you can hear wherever your mouse is. If you hover over that note and you move this line, you can hear what's going to happen between the line. This is really good for hearing the difference between two different chords. So if I have this chord here and I right-click, I can hear the difference between them pretty quickly. So I can determine what I want to do next with the next chord. So this is pretty static, pretty flat. They're all root inversion chords. I'm going to play around with them just by choosing some of these notes and once again holding down Control and pressing up and down to change which octave they're in. I'm going to start off by taking all my bass notes and moving them up because I want my bass to be in charge of that. I don't want to have to worry about my keyboard doubling up on those root notes. So I'm taking all my root notes and moving them up an octave. Now it's my decision what I want to do with the other ones here. Maybe I want to take this, this B note here and move that up. Maybe I want this A to move up. And I'll leave those down. So I'm kind of creating, if you look at the top of this and how it's moving down, it's kind of going to descend downward. And that's kind of what I'm going for here for this. I want my first section to be moving up. And now this section is going to be moving down instead, contrary motion. Let's hear it. All right. So now we've done a little bit of work with harmony. We understand how we can create chords based off of just skipping white notes. Essentially, 1, 4, or 1, 3, and 5 creates a triad. Just so you know, if you kept on going with that idea of skipping a white note and working with thirds, you would create a 7th chord, which is also very useful if you're into using any kind of jazz stuff. Then the 7th chord really adds that flavor. Dominant 7s are used in a lot of blues music and funk music. So there are possibilities beyond what you're hearing here as far as adding the flavor of a 7th note really adds more to this. You can still have a 1-4-5 song, but you can have a lot more variety depending on what you do with your 7ths. All right, that said, let's continue on. And let's see how we can edit these chords to make them a little more fun. So just like our bass lines, we're able to go in here and chop them if we wanted to. So I could go up to my tools up here in the top left of your piano roll, and I could go down to where it says chop. When I go and chop, then I can choose how I want. Whoa, sorry about that. We can go back into chop here, and it looks like I'm having some trouble here. Hold on a second. I've got warning message or something. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to choose all of these notes here. I'm going to go into my tools and go to chop. And from here, you'll see that you can choose a pattern. So here, if I use swing, this is what it'll sound like. Notice that when you use a chopper, not only does it change the time that you are chopping up your notes, but it also affects the velocity down here, the velocity controls of each one of these notes. So underneath each one of these notes down here, we have these little grid lines down here, and these allow you to change how hard, essentially, each note is being hit. If it's a grid that basically shows if you want it to be really quiet, you'd have the sound start down here. If you want it louder, then you go up towards the top. You don't want to just pound out to where everything is full volume all the time. That is unless you're trying to make it sound very computerized. If you want it to sound very artificial and computerized, then you would want to have your velocities all be very, very similar to each other. However, if you wanted it to be more humanist, that is, it sounds, I guess, if you want to call it imperfect, you can call it imperfect, but really it's having a live sound to it, then your velocities would not be the same. They would be changed. Even subtle differences in velocity will do a lot as far as making it sound way more human. So I'm going to go up here and change the pattern from swing to something else. Let me see what some of these others want to sound like. There's a whole bunch of different ones that you can try out. Some of the basic ones are up here. So these are the just rhythmic ones are up here on the top left. If you wanted it to actually change the way that it's cutting out your notes, you could use arpeggios. You could also have it set up chords for you if you wanted to play around with just some chords. And there's also some leads where you can make it actually create kind of a riff machine. And there is a riff machine that we're going to be playing with soon. As you see right here, riff machine step 1. You can choose one of these settings. If you use the time multiplier, look at that. It's moving around my notes, but it's going to stay in the same note range that I put. So I just picked basic 1. I changed my time multiplier, and look at what it's doing to my melody. What is this going to do? Yep, sounds like computer music to me. All right, so yeah, just to give you a glimpse that you don't really have to know a whole lot in order to really make some interesting style of music, as long as you learn some of the tools that are in FL Studio and what is available, and just use your ear to make decisions. You don't have to really spend a whole lot of time. I mean, it's good to know what you're doing, but also it's fun just to jump in and try making some things that just sound different, right? Sometimes it's just fun to see what the computer can do. Yeah, so we got all kinds of fun stuff that we can play around with. I can go into this chopper, and there's a whole bunch of things in here for you to play around with. So if you're ever just having difficulty coming up with some ideas, sometimes it's good just to let the computer take a little idea, and then you can build on that idea and make it however you want. You give it a little bit of collaborative control, and then let it come up with an idea, and then maybe you can build from there. But it doesn't stop there. Let's see some of the other tools that we have. There's one in particular that's very useful, and that is the strum tool here, especially for keyboards. This is a great thing, especially if you want to try to emulate like a guitar sound. The strum tool is great for this. So if you click on strum, you're going to see that a new menu pops up. It looks like I clicked something wrong again. I think it's because of my recording software. My apologies. Let me see if I can find this thing that it's looking for. I'm trapped. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go back into strum, or I got to select all the notes that I want to strum. I'll go to strum, and you'll see this pop up. Now, this is a very cool tool because it lets you essentially artificially chop the beginnings of your notes to make it sound like a human player's playing them. So instead of having them all play at the same time, if I change this, you'll see it moves my notes over, and it mostly keeps the notes that are on the bottom in the same spot, but it's going to move the notes a little bit over to the side. So if you're playing a guitar or you want some kind of strum type pattern, this is a great way to make it seem like there is actually a player, a human player that is very infinitesimally moving these notes over, so it sounds more human when we play it. Also, I'm going to click on preserve end so they all end at the right time here. I might want to chop that off so they all, at least the end parts, line up and cut at the right spot. But if we hear this, you're going to hear that now the notes start at slightly different times. So this is way more like an actual piano player playing something. Those little differences in timing really make it sound like a keyboardist is playing this. Especially if I go in, let me cancel this real quick. I'm going to reset this. I'm going to invert some of these chords a little bit and move them around. I might take this note. I want to move that one up, I think. Maybe not. Let me go back over here. I'm going to move the C up. There we go. Move this up. And I'll move this one up. This is just personal taste here. All right, let's try that. There's a little bit of a jump here that I don't like, but let's hear how this is going to sound. I'll select all these notes. Once again, I'm going to use that strum tool, so I'm just going to go up to the wrench up here on the top of your tools. Go to the strum tool. Here it is. So now if I just move these notes over just a little bit, like about there is probably good. And I'm going to preserve the end so that way the notes end at the correct time. All right. I like that. All right, so this should give you a few tools to play with when it comes to harmony. There's a lot of great tools that are out there. These are some of the ones that are really useful for being able to create fun harmony along with your bass lines that you've created in 145. Hopefully this opens up a little bit of possibilities of different kinds of notes that you want to add in. And having a little bit of an understanding of that, the fact that chords are made up of 1, 3, and 5 of the root notes. So it's not 1, 3, and 5 of the entire scale. It's whatever happens to be the root note of the song you're playing. So it's all based off the bass line, basically. We have the bass line right here. This is just 1 and 4. Over here it goes 5, 4, 5, 4, 1. And when I have my actual chords, they're related to those notes that are playing. So you're not putting down 1, 3, 5 just as far as the white keys that are over here on the side. It's based on the notes that are being played at that moment in time. And even though these notes look like they're much different and they're spread out and there's a whole bunch of different chords that are happening here, yes, they're different chords, but really they're the same notes. They're just the same exact notes. They're the 1, the 3, and the 5 of each chord, and we're just moving them around, changing what octaves they are so we can get different sounds out of them. Let's hear how this production sounds now that we've added some harmony. One last thing that's very helpful to do, you can actually make these patterns unique. So if I wanted to use the same idea of this keys 1, but change it up just a little bit for keys 2, you can, in the arrangement window here, you can click on the top left here and go to Make Unique. And when you do that, it creates a new pattern for you over here on the side, and it duplicates it. So this is basically exactly the same as keys 1, but I can go in and I can change a note here. Like, let's say I want this first note to be moved up an octave, like so. Now, when I go back into my arrangement window, you'll see that that note and just that one note here has been changed just for this section. So the beginning of my keys 1 sounds like this, and the beginning of my keys 1 here sounds different. This is really helpful for creating harmonies that work. As you can see, this top note moves up, and I didn't want it to drop all the way down at the beginning, so I'm just going to go in here and move this last note down here up as well. That way I can see my main line here goes up, 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 and it kind of stays up there. This top note right here of my harmony determines kind of what you hear the most out of the whole production. Now, making patterns unique is great for this, for being able to touch up one section and change around a little section. Really good for harmony. Also really good for drum fills. If you wanted to create a drum fill just on the end of this section right here, if I wanted to put a fill in right here, I could do that by making this unique and then going in and adding a little fill at the end. So it still has exactly the same drum line or the drum feel, but then I can add some notes in here with no problem. All right, I hope you have fun creating some great 1-4-5 harmony projects. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Enjoy.